Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. I don't have too much official news when it comes to the development of EVE Online, but everyone I think noticed that the emerging conduits have been nerfed substantially. They've been given a much longer respawn timer and I see a lot of people experiencing a massive nerf to the loot drops and the salvaging as well. So I'll have to explore that myself a little bit. The spawn timer is definitely something that has changed because I just made like an all-in-one fit for the rattlesnake so that I can basically loot and salvage while finishing up the site, and it basically I was ready by the 1 minute respawn time to go to the next one, and now it's completely unnecessary because it takes like 10 minutes or so for the next conduit to develop. On the loot drops, I'm not entirely sure. I'm actually getting some items that are pretty valuable from time to time, so I'll have to do some experimentations on that. Honestly, it would of course be nice if at least a certain number of weeks or maybe like a month after a change has hit the game, that CCP would actually officially announce them, but I think right now they want to keep it dynamic, they want to keep us on our toes, and so they don't actually announce changes like this. Some people are even speculating that they are lowering the exploration loot drops as well. Well, it is possible. I mean, I've had some pretty bad weeks in the last few weeks when it comes to exploration myself. Well, we'll see how it develops in the future, of course, and we'll keep an eye on all of that. Right now, Plex for Good is happening as well, so if you want to donate to help the Red Cross for the Australian bushfires, you can do that as well. There's gonna be like an EVE streaming marathon that's gonna take place as well, and CCP has now promised us some apparel, some shirts, I think it was, for the donators to Plex for Good in the latest dev blog about that. So looks pretty interesting, and yeah, we'll have to wait for some actual announcements from CCP before we can actually know exactly what their plans are. Now, FanFest is approaching. I am fully expecting a lot of information to drop between now and then. That means we get to move on to the New Eden store. Let's see what's happening there, and we do have some sales happening. We still have the Easy Deco Combine skin for sale from 55 to 41 plex. I still see a sale on some Snowline Blade Racer skins as well. The ones that I like here, conversions skin for the Ortrus and the Barghest. I think those look pretty damn cool. And then actually this bundle, the Heatseeker bundle, I think is pretty cool. Now the Caracal Ghost Bird is not that great, but the Cerberus Octopus Red skin, Red Flight skin, I really like what this looks like. That's pretty damn cool. Then we've got the Drake Zinto Isideko skin, definitely something pretty unique looking with enough black on it that I personally like it. And then the Tengu Steel Cardinal skin is actually quite shiny and quite nice as well. So we actually have some sales here again happening in the New Eden store if you want to buy some skins on the cheaper side. Let's move on to the market itself then. Let's go, and as always we will start with some Plex and stuff, and that's happening at 340. Like that, and let's take a look at the price history here. You can see at the very tail end we are trying to get up a little bit in price, so nothing too major yet. We can definitely say that in the last, I would say, almost 2 weeks or so, we have been pretty flat and hesitating in the market, but now we do get our first little inklings that the prices are going up. In Jita we're selling for almost 3.5 million ISK, buyers are staying just above 3.2 million, so there's definitely a bit more margin I think opening up here. And then in the player owned trade hubs we're above 3.3 million, so it's still very narrow. Generally speaking, we're hesitating and we have a slight trend upwards. Will this mean that the bottom is ending? Well, it is my personal expectation, of course. I do think that as we have the Plex for Good sale, I think that's going to stop any downwards pressure on the price of Plex. And then as we get towards FanFest and CCP starts with some announcements, that's when perhaps we'll start to see the real turnaround for Plex prices. That's basically my personal expectation. It's a gamble, of course. I don't have any way of really knowing that. Next up we have the multiple pilot train certificates, still flat as well, although at the last couple of days you also get a slight uptrend as well. Let's take a look at the prices here. 1.6 billion ISK for the sellers, and a first buyer coming in above 1.4 billion. That should put a little bit of pressure on the prices to go up as well here. After that, we have the skill extractors that are basically flat as well, with a slight edge towards 380 million on the chart in the last couple of days. So we are talking 377 million ISK for the sellers, 357 for the buyers. That makes it pretty interesting here again. If the average price is now heading for 380 million and the sellers are at 377 million ISK, that does mean that the buyers are no longer grabbing those extractors for that price. If the average price would be somewhere around 365 or something like that, then that would be pretty obviously, so we're talking like down here on the lowest days. If we can get that data point, yeah, 370, it could be 365 to 370, I think, on this average. Then that means that there's still buyers grabbing skill extractors from their buy orders as well. Now at the tail end here, we're heading towards closer and closer to that 380 mark. We should probably go like that. That does really mean that the sellers are completely dominating the market, and those buyers will be forced to slowly go up in price, putting more pressure on the price to go up on average. After that, we've got the skill injectors. Let's start with this large skill injectors, and that's very hesitant chart. That was not what I expected. So for me, the bottom here in November was pretty obvious. When you go below 800 million ISK, people do tend to buy that pretty quickly. So then we went up to 900 million ISK as well. But look at that hesitation. In 2 steps, we go back down, landing on the 800 million ISK, not going below that. And then here we're doing the same again right now, just bouncing off that 800 million mark. 822 for the sellers, 788 for one buyer, 751 for another one, and yeah, it's actually 788 for most buyers in the player-owned trade hubs, but that's still a pretty sizable margin, 822 to 788. And then look at the average price bouncing on that 800 million ISK. Well, that's where buyers actually have lots of transactions happening on this part of the sales that can happen, driving those average prices from the 820 range down to the 800 range, because you do still have people that are selling these large skill injectors below 800 million ISK. That's a very big difference between these large skill injector prices and, for instance, the skill extractor prices slowly edging back to that 380 mark, which is where the sellers are at. That's actually pretty important. I think for me that means that if you want those plex investments and those skill extractor investments, you're probably starting to be a little bit late. Buyers are forced up in price, but for the large skill injectors, you can definitely still grab them below 800 million ISK if that's your barrier. After that, we have the small skill injectors that are actually continuing to go down in price, breaking through the 170 million mark. It's 168 for the sellers and 155 for the buyers. And here you immediately notice that we have a completely different dynamic. Again, 168 million for the sellers and 155 for the buyers. Average between that a little bit above 160. And oh yeah, actually no, it's really the sellers that are still dominating this price, but for some reason they're dropping on more supply. Last 24 hours we actually have some sellers coming in on the market, and volumes are still well above average. So we have a little bit of dumping happening, which is kind of weird if I look at this entire chart. But we have a bit of dumping happening, and we clearly have a domination of the sellers here as well. It is starting to become, this whole plex stuff category, in my opinion, is starting to turn from a buyer's market to a seller's market. So if you want the good deals, I think you have to move quickly. And it's the small scale injectors, not the daily alpha injectors. Let's take a look at that one. Continuing its seesaw movement, staying below 40 million ISK despite trying. So here we have 39.7 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. Again, decently narrow margin, and at 39 million ISK, well, here it's a mixed picture, right? Sometimes you're at 39 million, sometimes you go down to, let's see if I can get that new mouse, 36 million ISK, which is definitely still sales happening at that 35 million ISK range. Daily alpha injectors are definitely in a weirder spot. You would think that once we go over above 40 million ISK, there's no need for these sellers to go back down. But no, look at that new supply in the last 24 hours. All of this coming in, driving the price down below 40 million ISK. And this is a sizable amount of daily alpha injectors. You won't get that many sales. So basically what I'm seeing here is that we're still absorbing all of these sales volumes in the daily alpha injectors, and we'll need quite a bit of patience to see those go back to the 60-70 million ISK range where you would want to sell. But you can still buy these for close to 35 million ISK on the buyer's market. It's not very likely to happen in the plex market, in the skill extractor market, and even in the small skill injector market. Those times seem to be over as well. In the daily alpha injectors and in the large scale injectors, we are still seeing average prices that indicate dumping to those buyers to be happening. So pretty important. I think this could be a turnaround week, and as I've said, that is my expectation. As we move closer to FanFest, we'll get more announcements, we'll get more hype, and we'll get more demand in all of this stuff as well. Next up, we have the mineral market coming in at 11 minutes. Like that. Let's take a look at what Tritanium is doing, giving back a little bit of those gains. Went very close to 7 ISK, of course, just about 10 days ago, and we are now trying to land on the 6 ISK mark. It is, let's take a look at the JITA range, 660 for the sellers, still pretty damn respectable, and then the buyers are coming in at 617. Well, obviously when you have this amount of volatility and you go up this quickly from less than 5.5 to almost 7 ISK, you have to stabilize that a little bit. But as long as we're staying above 6 ISK, and right now sellers are still above 6.5 in JITA at least, there's probably some stuff happening in the player-owned trade hubs. Yeah, those are trying to drive the price back down to 625. Interesting to see that move to the Tranquility Trade Tower, including a 1.1 billion ISK sell order as well. JITA is firmly staying above 6.5 for now. 2 billion here, a billion here, but we see some trade moving to the player-owned trade hubs on this, well, this volatile period for Tritanium. Very interesting precedent here as well. Right now 6 to 6.5 is definitely still possible for Tritanium, which is a pretty good price. So Pyrite had a good year from this 1 year chart perspective and is continuing its slow increase in price away from 5 ISK. Very interesting to see as well. 534 for the sellers in JITA, 531 for the buyers as well. And here you don't have that volatility, so you don't have an attempt at a takeover from the player-owned trade hubs. We're hardly seeing sales happening there. After that, we have the Mexalon market that is now also continuing its steady recovery back to a price above 55 ISK on the chart. That's definitely a nice comeback as well. Once we're getting towards that 60 ISK, we're definitely in the previous averages and on a pretty good price for Mexalon. And it's 56 for the sellers and 53.5 for the buyers. We do have, well, that big slump, but we don't have that volatile period where we go up, we start to hesitate, move back up and back down. So this feels a lot more steady as well. So let's see if we have player-owned trade hub action. Actually we do. We have some undercutting happening at 56 to 55.4, but it's not as massive as what we saw in the Tritanium market. So this is probably absorbable by the market, and I think JITA could still continue to dominate the Mexalon trade market as well. After that, we've got Isogen. Bad news continuing. We're going back down to less than 13.8 ISK on the chart. In fact, we're playing with 13 ISK at this point. More volume spikes. They're not as big as on the increase, but they are still there. I think that indicates more dumping of Isogen, despite the fact that we're selling for close to 13 ISK in all likeliness. It's still 14 for the sellers here. Buyers coming in at 13.06. That's still a pretty wide margin. I think this volume was probably some people saying, you know what, I want to get rid of this 13 ISK, it's fine, there it is, and you know, just sell to those buyers, driving the price back down again. And for Noxium, we have a stabilization heading towards 250 ISK. That's still not good, so we would love to see a recovery like for Mexalon in Noxium, but it doesn't look like that's in the books. We're talking, let's see here, 250 for the sellers if we go for the without the player-owned owned trade hubs. I think that's more representative right now. We've got a couple sales very close to that, but nothing too major. And then the buyers are coming in at 233. We're trying to, I think, defend 250. Perhaps on a bit more demand we could get there, but right now we're clearly trading below average for Noxium as well. This looks to be the new normal for this mineral, unfortunately. After that, we've got the Zydrine market that managed to claw its way back to a 550 range for a couple of days. Needed to give back some of that ground, but it looks like we're staying well above 500 ISK at this point. Well above, not for very long. 503 for the sellers, 481 for the buyers. Player owned trade hubs in that same range. And let's look at the last 24 hours. All of this is in the last 24 hours. A full front page going from 515 basically to 503. That is a lot of pressure with not that much supply, but again, it's that typical pattern in the Zydrine and Megasite market. 2 million here, 8 million here, 2 million here, another 2 million, another 8 million, another 2 million. And these are corporations that are, doing their daily, weekly, bi-weekly cycles of their moon mining structures, and as a result, it's a lot of pressure, continued and continuous pressure on the price here to keep things in check. You no longer have a domination of the sellers that can decide, all right, we're going to dump 15 million, we're going to ask 514, and eventually we will be able to sell that, because supply used to not be existent in HiSec. It was much more dominated by big sellers able to decide on the price ranges. Right now, that's completely gone. You get competed out by many small players. After that, we have the Megasite market that also tried to get back to 400 ISK, did so for a little bit, but is moving back down as well. 375 ISK for the sellers, 350 basically for the buyers, the new normal. And here again, it's a little bit less pronounced. It's also a little bit less high in price, but you again have 750,000, 6 million, a million here, almost 2 million here. Very small numbers, but quite a few sell orders coming in every single day that are keeping these prices in check. And finally, we have Morphite that is actually increasing again from an above average price, heading to more than 12,500 ISK. On average, we're talking 13,200 almost for the sellers, 12,100 for the buyers. A sizable margin that is starting to open up, but right here it's pretty obvious that the sellers are able to dictate the price, and that's exactly what I was talking about. You had a much wider margin before in Zydrine and Megasite as well, when you can only grab that from nullsec, lowsec, and wormhole space, at least in sizable quantities. There were ways to get it from HiSec, but you had to be very lucky. So Morphite now, no HiSec sources, so you get this massive difference between sellers and buyers. You also tend to have, for Morphite, 1 million units, 600,000 units is probably still decently large in scope, and you have, well, a price range above 12,500 on average on the chart, 13,100 for the sellers. That tends to get dominated more by the sellers. Right here we're still on that average, I think, because we are in an above average chart, but if we get back to a more average 10k range, I think you're going to see 10,000 ISK for the sellers, like maybe 9,000 ISK for the buyers, and then an average price on that 10,000 ISK range. That used to be the pattern when you had no local sources and easily accessible production sources from small groups as well. That means we get to move on to the PI market, coming in at 1830. Let's take a look at that one. Last couple of months basically dominated by a lack of demand, and some recovery noted in the last week, but definitely not across the board. Advanced PI materials were the exception. At least some of them did break out to, well, 1-year highs, you could say that, but the volatility is basically gone. As long as they're above their average, which for the broadcast notes on this chart is above 2 million, it's actually a good performance. So we're talking 2 million for the sellers and less than 1.9 million for the buyers, but the average price is above 2 million, which means that we are clearly having a market that is dictated by the sellers right now. They're able to ask their slightly above average price for broadcast nodes. Construction blocks was recovering, did very well to get back to 12,000 discs. In fact, some data points at 13 as well. Now it is recovering, but average price 11,000 for the year is definitely possible. 12,800 for the sellers, 11,400 for the buyers. We are still above average for construction blocks. This was one of those goods that had recovered from their fall slump, but it was not across the board. Consumer electronics, for instance, is continuing to struggle and is in fact again playing with that low point. Where are those buyers at? 11,600 for the sellers, 9,600 for the buyers. That is extremely low, below 10,000 discs. That is practically investment worthy, and you can see that despite that, people are losing their patience. 1, 2, 3, 4 clear volume spikes, and at least some of them, especially the latest one, has to be more dumping despite the very low prices. So this is a place, I think, where you can now make a very good investment in consumer electronics. Buy them below 10,000 discs. Have a little bit of patience. The normal average price should be 12,500 discs, a sizable potential margin right here. After that, we get the coolants market that has actually done really well. It is a bit different because it is tied to fuel, very easy to produce. In fact, I make that on 2 gas planets, and as long as we're above 12,500 discs, I think we're performing pretty damn well. 13,666 is a great price. Almost 14,000 discs for coolants is actually, even historically speaking, an amazing price. Let's take a quick look here at competition in the player-owned trade hubs. It is there, 13,500. Someone is dumping a little bit at 12,800, but with 500 of them easily absorbable by the market, and buyers at 12,300 is actually pretty damn good. So coolants, very strong performance right now, above average, a bit like construction blocks. So it is not just tied to fuels, but there's definitely differences there. Next up, we've got the cryoprotectant solutions. We have new implants that came out, so that again boosts the price back to that 180 range. 174,000 for the sellers. You can see a lack of supply. 150,000 for the buyers. This is of course an exception. This is a CCP influence chart because new items come out, the new implants that require this very specific item. That is why it is completely out of step with the other PI materials. Enriched uranium here did suffer a bit of a winter slump here, although it started from October, November. We clearly have a winter slump here in December. Bring the price down to 13,000 discs. 14k should be the average, and you can see here we did recover on enriched uranium as well. 14,800 for most sellers, 14,100 for the buyers, and this is also tied to fuels, so probably the reason why we have a little bit stronger demand, a little bit more steady demand as well. Although if you look at the ticker, you can also see that nitrogen fuel blocks are down to less than 19,000 discs. So ICE products must actually be cratering again, which is bad news for me because I actually have some investments in that. After that, we've got our integrity response drones. Normal price between this 2.25 and 2.5 million, you could say. Again, difficult period in the fall, but a bit of a recovery up to 2.5. So I would actually say that integrity response drones selling for 2.4 million and buyers at 2.3 million is pretty damn good, able to ask a normal price. After that, we've got our mechanical parts. Look at that fall slump here again in October. Quite a bit of hesitation to recover in the month of November and December. Here in January, we finally got there, 12k. That's back to a normal price, but it doesn't always work out here. More supply has probably created the price again. 11,600 for the sellers. It's not that bad, but it's not 12,000 disc, and then 10,600 for the buyers is still a very wide margin, showing that the lack of demand can still be a part of the equation in the PI market. Organic mortar applicators next, very flat at 1 million discs. This one I would call it a below average range. It's selling for just above 1 million. Buyers are just below 1 million. You can see the super narrow margin here. It basically found its price. It's not as good as broadcast nodes, for instance, but it's still an okay price for organic mortar applicators. Basically a very steady market with very little fluctuations in the very few fluctuations in the last couple of months. After that, we get robotics. No, thank you. After that, we've got robotics, which is not doing well actually, tied to fuel, so that's the exception to the rule here as well. As long as we were above 100k, which we did in the early summer, that was actually really good. You can also see the very small range, 95 to 110,000 disc is not a big range to trade in, but then we had that false slump again, going down to less than 90,000 disc, 85,000 on some days as well. Tried to recover, doesn't work out, and now we have a slow recovery towards 95,000 disc. How long will it last? Probably not very long. 95,000 disc for the sellers. Oh, well, this is a bit different. 90,000 now for the buyers. Some buyers are starting to move in that range, and you're starting to see a bit more on the buy side of things. So we could finally be stabilizing. Normally, if you had like one page to browse here, and then like here, you can probably see 6 full pages of sell orders, something like that. Complete lack of demand. It feels a bit more stable. So perhaps the recovery for robotics has started. If the buyers are now supporting 90k, sellers are heading for 95k, maybe we can move that up on just a bit more demand. We'll have to see in the upcoming weeks. Self-harmonizing power cores next. You can see that 2 million average. We are above that. That's a very similar situation to the others. Almost 2.1 million for the sellers, a bit less than 2 million for the buyers. That is actually quite okay for self-harmonizing power cores. Superconductors. I produced this, continuing to struggle. Yeah, this one is basically, I think, too easily produced for the market again. We went towards that average price, almost 12,500 disc. We almost made it after our false slump, but it's to no avail. New volumes come in, crashing the price back down. Less than 10,000 disc for the sellers, 9,000 disc for the buyers. Last 24 hours, still half a page with 200,000 units here. And this is the difference when you look at the buyers. Robotics, we are finally starting to see some buyers come in for these superconductors. It's basically one page, 9,000 disc and below. This is clearly the lack of demand that is causing the very bad prices for superconductors. So I'm continuing to hoard this one, hoping for better prices later down the line. Then we've got test cultures doing really well to hold on to that 10,000 disc range. Actually, for the 1 year chart, it's a great price. 10,800 for the sellers, 9,000 for the buyers. The danger is a pretty wide margin, almost 2,000 disc on this. That is very wide, but you can see I can browse here, but I can also browse here. A little bit of a lack of demand, but it is not as bad as some of the other goods. So expect some pressure, excuse me, but nothing too major, I think. And then finally we have the wetware mainframes that actually broke out like 2 weeks ago up to 2.5 million disc, is now landing on the 2.1, back on its average, 2.3 almost for the sellers, in fact 2.1 for the buyers. So here we again have a very good price for this advanced PI material. I think some speculation must have come in on an announcement at FanFest for more structures. That means we move on to the advanced moon materials here, 2730, let's say. And so now that we know that this is not really tied to regional production sources, but to factional production of ships that they are needed for, this does put everything in a different line. Photonic metamaterials tied to the Galente ship productions, continuing to slowly go down, landing on 15,000 disc, which is the 1 year low point. 15,300 for the sellers, 14,200 for the buyers. So definitely buy worthy at a 1 year low point. If we try to get something like 14k on the chart, clearly you're buying below the entire chart. I think that that's investment worthy. What you need for this to turn around is not a big Nozick war, although that would help of course, or something like that in the right region. No, what you need is for Tech 2 Galente ships to come back at the forefront. For instance, we need more Nemesis ships, we need more Ishtars, which are actually doing pretty okay in price, at least have been in the couple of in the last couple of weeks. Stuff like that needs to be at the forefront. That's when you'll probably see a recovery of this price. Right now, to be honest, I think Galente ships are still in a decent place. 14,200 for the production here, for the buyers here is pretty low. I would dare to put some risk in that. Plasmonic metamaterials tied to the Minmatar market, able to command 22,500 disc, almost definitely above average for that 1 year. 22,000 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers. That is probably still the impact of the rapid fire update that gave buffs to the Minmatar weapon system. As a result, we can here we can expect that production of Tech 2 Minmatar ships has ramped up. There is more demand for this, hence the big difference in chart and in price range between the photonic and the plasmonic metamaterials. Here, of course, produce and sell, I think you're seeing nice margins. After that, we get, and we're actually, I switched out the metamaterials and the carbides. Sorry for that, but I'm going to continue on that vein then. Next up, we have the non-linear metamaterials for Caldari. Try to go back to 25,000 discs, which is actually even higher than the plasmonics. Is now landing back at 22.5k, 24,400 still for the sellers, 21,700 for the buyers. So for Caldari Tech 2 ships, it really looks like we have decent demand, although the prices themselves are below average. So we're maybe like a little bit below historical price ranges, because Caldari tends to be by far the most popular race in EVE Online. 25,000 as a normal price is well above all the others. Yeah, Caldari ships need to be produced, of course. And then finally we've got the terahertz metamaterials. That is for the Amar, least popular, so a slightly lower average range as well, although almost 25k, doing pretty well here. And then at the moment though, we are clearly below average. We're talking 21,300 for the sellers, 21,000 for the buyers. Well, the outlier is clearly the Galente with the photonic metamaterials that are at the 1-year low points. If you look at all the others then, so there's two ways to look at it, right, on the different ship types from the different factions, but also looking at it from just the metamaterials market. The Galente are actually at a 1-year low point, in a great spot, I think, to make an investment on, because all the others are seeing decent demand and around average prices or slightly below average prices, but all of them are also at a much higher rate or range than the photonic metamaterials. Let's look at the basis then. Here is the crystalline carbonite market, and that is a complete dichotomy that is telling me, yeah, we have to go buy these photonic metamaterials. Crystalline carbonites tied to the Galente, 160 actually on its average, slightly above average, with 170 for the sellers, 160 for the buyers on a lack of supply. If this keeps up, then eventually this should dry up as well, and we should see a rebound. Very interesting. Ferrite carbide, that's a little bit the opposite as well. We've got the Minmatar plasmonics that are actually doing really well in price. Here we're crashing down on one big volume spike, so that is something to keep in mind. It is very much possible that we got to that 150 range and that an investor decided to dump his positions. That was not me, by the way. 131 for the sellers, 129 for the buyers is clearly below average for ferrite carbide. And here the reflection that I would make is ferrite carbide is below average. Plasmonic metamaterials are actually pretty high. Minmatar ships have been buffed, so they should be in the right place for more demand. Ferrite carbide could actually be pretty interesting to invest in with a 130 buy price. It's not the very best, right? 120 would be the dream, but it's definitely not that bad. After that, we have our titanium carbide market. That's much more stable at the low end of its range, but 175 is still pretty respectable. 185 in fact for the sellers, 175 for the buyers. So Caldari pretty stable at a slightly below average range at the moment. Well, slightly at a below average range at the moment, I would say. And then we've got tungsten carbide for a Marship production that tried to get back to 200, pretty good, went back down on volumes. So here again, I would say a bit of dumping, trying to take advantage of even slightly higher prices. 182 for the sellers, 176 for the buyers, very much in line with the Caldari ones as well. Here basically not too much speculative stuff happening in my opinion. So yeah, that is pretty interesting. Galente, at least for the metamaterials, are substantially lower than everything else. I think that's where I would put some risk. And then ferrite carbide for Minmatar is counter to the general vibe that I'm getting from Minmatar production. So there's still some other advanced materials to cover. Fermionic condensates, big volumes continuing to go down in price. 86,000 for the sellers, 83,000 for the buyers. We'd love to see 90k. We are clearly below average here. Ferrogel, trying to climb back in a second step, but yeah, you need to be in the 45 to 50k range, so we still have a ways to go. 42,000 for the sellers, 41,000 for the buyers, trying to recover from a December slump to a low point. We should really have bought here, and some people definitely did. You can see this volume probably plugged this gap. They made a pretty good deal. Fuller rides next, actually going above average, although the range here 900 to 1100 is not that great. 1200 now for the sellers, that's not so bad. Buyers forced up above 1000. Here also a slump in mid-December. You could have bought this for probably 850 or something like that. Pretty good deal as well. Hypersynaptic fibers are back on their 13k average, I would say. 12,900 for the sellers, 11,400 for the buyers. That's back on the average price. Again, also a December slump though, would have been a slight opportunity, not that great. Nanotransistors, yeah, the oddball out here that had a super strong summer and even fall at 6,000 disk on a lack of supply. Volatility is here, and now we're basically in between. 5,570 for the sellers, 5,400 for the buyers. Finally, the volatility is gone. The market has found its price range. Looks to be 5,500 for nanotransistors. You know, you used to go from 6k to 5k on between sellers and buyers. So here we finally have a stabilization of the situation with still strong demand, but supply has probably become a little bit better in this good. Then we've got the phenolic composites, that's doing okay, above average with the price well above 2000 disk, 2200 for the sellers, almost 2065 for the buyers. That's not bad at all. Again here, nice November opportunity. And then we've got the ceramic fibers that are just below average, also recovering from a November slump here. 440 almost for the sellers, 416 for the buyers. That's quite respectable as well. And yeah, always Captain Hindsight, of course, would make the very best deals, but it is quite noticeable here in the advanced boom materials that buying at these pronounced one-year low points tends to be a good deal. Quite a few of these other advanced materials have shown that pattern, and even in the metamaterials and the carbonites, we do see that volatility, and that the average prices tend to make it back quite often. Let's move on to some Tech 2 ships then and see what that market's all about. 3630. Alright, as always, we'll start with the Aries, an interceptor that for me is a bit of a gauge of what may be happening, and that's a sign of some volatility at least. We went to close to one-year low point at 24.5 million, jumped up to 35 million. Very difficult trade to time in my opinion, but some people must have made quite a bit of risk on this one. And then down here we are currently in the in-between spot again, 29 million for the sellers, 27 million for the buyers. That's where you could still sell, but your massive margin is gone, and it's definitely still too early to buy. After that, we've got the Basilisk market that's also recovering. A little bit of volatility here as well. High point 250, low point 200 million. Right now we are selling for 230 and we're buying for 205. So again, 205 is pretty low, but not really the low point. And we're selling at a decent margin, so it's not going to be easy to grab any of those buy prices. It's the in-between spot where unfortunately you don't want the market to be if you're looking to invest or to take a profit. The Cerberus, again showing that volatility, I think a very exemplary chart. 280 at the high point, goes down to 200 million in a matter of 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks later it goes up to 300 million. That's where you can make some trades, and in fact I did buy a Cerberus on this slump. If I look at the, I think it's on yeah, this one. I bought a Cerberus for 195, and then I was too early on this increase. I sold it for 250 already. Could have sold it for another 50 million in profit. I was basically a little bit early, but it shows that these trades can be made. And even this, I think, buy for 195, sell for 250 or 249 is a pretty damn good trade. So that's why I love the Tech 2 market and the volatility. Right now, of course, we're on our way back down. It's still 277 million for the sellers, 263 for the buyers. So we're obviously still trading quite above average. Don't buy Cerberus right now, I would say. Next up here we've got the Crow. That one is pretty flat. Again, does have volatility that you can trade with at the tail end here. A little bit less on that. It's 29 million for the sellers, 25.2 million for the buyers. That is not really anything that we should make a move on, I think. Then we've got the Eagle that went up to 250. We expected the Eagle to replace the Munin for the nullsec meta, but doesn't look like that's really happening. So we're going back down a little bit. Look at the trade volumes; they are completely abysmal. 225 for the sellers, 203 for the buyers. I'm gonna just make another executive decision here. I'm not seeing the same volatility that we see in most of the other ships. The volumes are not there. I don't think it's worth it to keep following the Eagle. So we're gonna remove you from the chart. If it had taken over the nullsec meta and you'd see these volumes increase, you'd see that volatility come back, it would have stayed. But right now I think that it's gone. Next up we've got the Guardian. That's quite a bit better, right? Highs at 280, lows at 200 million. Right now we are unfortunately a little bit in between, but we just came from a 1-year low point where you could have probably sold for 240 and bought for well below 200 million. We're at 225 now for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. Again, it's the recovery phase. Those have to happen as well, of course, on that volatility. The Heretic is actually selling for 70 million on average on a complete lack of supply. Still 50. Jesus, how is that possible? That's kind of crazy. It is showing that this is a very weird market with basically no real demand out there. 51 million. We dry up to 3 sell orders with like 36 ships on it. They're selling for 70 million ISK, and those buyers are saying, you know what, that's fine. Then just we're staying right where we are. We're not even gonna move with a few million ISK. Nope, it's 51 million for a Heretic. If you want to get rid of it, dump it to me right now, and then I'll at least make a profit. But this really shows that this market is gone, and that if you want to, and actually in my opinion the buyers are right. If you want to have anything to do with the Heretics or the Interdictors in general, you have to grab them at that super cheap price, at the lowest price possible, and then the gamble is that CCP takes action. But if that doesn't happen, then you're gonna be stuck with that Heretic for a pretty long time as well. Yeah, this is a crazy market that is showing that well, the Heretic, the Interdictors, I think need some CCP love to, I don't know, I mean, this is my speculation. Perhaps in nullsec they're producing them locally and using them, because to me the Interdictors are a very strong ship. They have their own use, they have their own niche, they're useful in big fleet fights, but maybe in the current situation in nullsec it's just not happening, and that's why you're getting this very weird, I mean, a 70 million ISK range between sellers and buyers on a 50 million buy is huge. That's crazy, but nobody's selling them and nobody's buying them either. So it's a very, very weird market right here. For the Hound, we like that a little bit better. Highs up to 40 million ISK. 35 is probably going to be the new normal. Lows 25 million. Right now, we're basically slowly recovering here as well. 30 million for the sellers. That's not so bad. 23.6 million for the buyers. They have been forced up a little bit as well. And did I buy any of these? I think I don't have any of them left for the Hounds. I basically made a trade on this one. The second wave is coming, but if it's 30 million now, look out for the decreasing volatility here. After that, we've got the Ishtar slowly going down in price now, finally touching 230 and going below that. 228 for the sellers, 209 for the buyers. Let's try to get 210 showing here. Still too early, but you can clearly see that the pressure is starting to build on the Ishtar. And once you get to those low points, you can see potentially the volatility of this ship can be very great. Keep one thing in mind. I think it's here that we did have basically a competition ship of the Ishtar that got nerfed for its PvE activity. That was the Vexor Navy issue, so this is why this happened. But you can clearly see that slumps do happen and then recoveries as well. So I'm waiting for the Ishtar get back to below 200 million ISK on the buyers, substantially below 200 million, and then I'll probably make a move as well on this one. Manticore, slight move up in the last couple of days away from 25 million, so here it's very difficult as well. 27 million for the sellers, but buyers are up a little bit as well. 24.8 million for the first one. Margins closing down. Will we see more volatility? It's entirely possible. You can clearly see. But right now, I think we're basically again too late to buy and too early to sell. For the Munin next, bit of a slump in December, down to 200 million ISK, recovered to 250. We don't really see big spikes, but we do go up to 300, so that's a nice range, 200 to 300 million ISK over the last year. Right now it's 248 million for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. It's still a sizable margin. It's also showing, I think, that just like PI has a lack of demand, I think Tech 2 has a bit of a lack of destruction right now, and thus also a lack of demand that is creating, well, big gaps between sellers and buyers. Here's the Nemesis charts. Again, 35 million. I do like this spiky behavior here at the tail end. Another trade that I took advantage of. I think it was this one, and you could have done so a second time. Right now, though, above 25 million on average, 27 for the sellers and 24.5 for the first buyer. Again, that margin closing is where it does is not good news. But then eventually, right? Here it happened for the star as well. Eventually, oversupply starts to take over and a new opportunity is created. So we just need, that was Nemesis, I think, last one, a little bit of patience in this case. Yeah, the Nemesis is not in the right place to buy, not in the right place to sell either. The Oneros then is in the right place to sell probably. You could have bought these for 180 million, now selling for 204. It gets squashed very quickly. 170 for the buyers. That's very, very low. I personally don't gamble too much on the Oneros because of the volumes. They're just too low compared to the other logistics cruisers. Then we get the Purifier, another nice spike to 40 million. This could have bought these for 25 million. We are on our way back down, and we're talking 29 for the sellers, 25.2 for the buyers. In fact, I bought Purifiers for 22 million on my trade, so keep it in mind, but this is of course where you can make the ISK. Then we get the Saber. Volatility at the tail end. Right now we're landing on 65 million ISK, so 66 for the sellers, 61.1 for the buyers. They have not budged for, I think, a whole year. I think if we go back to all these EVE talks, we're back in this situation. And this is exactly what's happening. The Heretic, we're at a higher price. Average price, sure, because there's just no supply. And then the Saber, we're at a lower range of the price. Why? Because there's supply. And what are those buyers saying? I want that cheapest price. I want to stay below the entire chart at 61 million ISK, which is somewhere around here. That's where I'm buying and nowhere else. And same with the Heretic here. We want to buy for 51 million ISK. That's right here below the entire chart. And that's where we're buying, and that's it. So the sellers right now can dictate the price, but it's very difficult to get any real sales going in these interdictors at the moment. After that, we get the Scimitar back at 230 million ISK and coming back down from that to 10 now for the sellers, 204 for the buyers. Again, low point here is 180, so that's not where you want to buy and that's not where you want to sell anymore. And then finally we get the Stiletto that's actually been really stable and is still being pretty stable, just below 30 million ISK. So that one, not really something you can trade too much on. 663 is going to keep things in check as well. Do I want to keep this one? Maybe I'll get rid of the Stiletto as well, and then we'll start to look for another Tech 2 ship with more volatility, with more potential for trades. Perhaps I'll add in a Marauder or something like that to keep an eye on those. If you have any suggestions for a Tech 2 ship to add back to the Tech 2 ship category, feel free to put that in the comments, although I'll keep deciding myself. That means we move on to the Tech 3 ship market, coming in at 48 minutes. And this has been a very interesting story for me personally, including, if I'm not mistaken, trying to sell a successful trade in the Guardian as well. Indeed, although not for all of them. I tried to buy 5 of them, only got 3 of them. I think it was something like that. But I bought for 27.5 million on the downturn here, and then I sold them for 13 9 million last week, I think, or maybe 2 weeks ago, on this increased price here. Sellers actually were above this chart average by quite a little bit. Very, very good trade in my opinion here as well. If you want to see another one that I made, Guardian bought for 180, sold for 240. Not bad at all in my opinion. I made quite a bit of risk on those. So for the Tech 3 ship market, what was happening for the first half of the year, maybe even the first 8 to 9 months, we had a very stable situation, balanced situation, where we had enough supply and enough demand. Everything was great for around 40 million ISK on average. If one ship got a little bit oversupplied, its price would decrease, but then price of other ships would increase. Production there would catch up, and then we would get a full stabilization of the situation. Unfortunately, in the fall, like with many things here, apparently in the last year, that gives me 1 hour. Yes, okay, thank God. Like with many things, apparently after the summer here we had a massive slump as well. Overproduction was very clear in the Tech 3 destroyer market, and we crashed down in price. And in the last week, maybe 2 weeks, we're finally starting to see that dry up and change. So let's take a look at it. 39 million now for the sellers of the confessor, 34 million for the buyers, and we're back in that healthy situation. We still have half a page of sellers, but it's 26.39, and then everything else is below 10. This is a much healthier situation for our demand as well. So we're back at almost 39 million. Keep in mind, 40 million normally was actually, the normal price range. So we're getting there for the confessor, and there's still new supply, but nothing completely outlandish or crazy. The Hecate was commanding a price of above 40 million ISK by quite a little bit, and here we see the exact opposite situation. The confessor recovering, and then that should mean a bit less production in the confessor. And where does it move to? To the Hecate, that has a better price, and here we see the price decline. That is that takeover of the normal market situation, market forces, where here oversupply caused this fall to winter crash down to 38 million. I only made a move on the confessor, should have moved on more of them, of course. Captain Hindsight here again. So here we're talking 41 million for the sellers, 39 million for the buyers, and yeah, that's exactly what you would expect. Full front page of new sell orders, 54, 41, 21. It's not 200, 300, 400. That's where the problem starts. But at a 41, above 41 million ISK range, what do you want to make now? Hecates or confessors? It's Hecates, and so this is going to drive the price down towards that 40 million ISK range as well. Then we'll probably slow down, and maybe the confessor will have moved up by then, seen more production. That is what we want to see in a normal, healthy market. The Jackdaw is on that 40 million range. You can see it's much flatter, much more normal. And here we're talking 40 million for the sellers, 37 million for the buyers. Really narrow margin. And look at that production. Half a front page in the last 24 hours. The difference with the confessor here is that below that for the Jackdaw we still have a 50 hanging on here at 40.5. We still have 15 here, and it's 26, 27, everything else below 10. This is normal. 40 million is also the normal price range, normal supply, nothing crazy or outlandish. And in the confessor, it must also be said, we have the slump in October down to 35 million, but it's been much less bad. Do we see a volume difference? No, the Jackdaw has basically weathered this storm a lot better than all the others, being much more steady in its price range. And then finally we've got this Vapul, very pronounced fall slump here as well, down to 32.5 million, recovered back, we're back at that 40 range. It is the least popular one, 41 million for the sellers, 37 million for the buyers, and here almost full front page. Keep in mind 41 is above confessor and Jackdaw right now. We've got 49 here, 11 here, but again, nothing too crazy. That oversupply situation is gone, in my opinion. Here we can definitely say that it has been fully absorbed by the market. We're back in the regular dynamic for the tactical destroyers. So unfortunately our opportunity to invest in these at a very cheap price is over as well, but it's great to see that dynamic is starting to show again, with the confessor going up in price, with the volumes here dropping down, and then the Heggate, that's actually the highest in price, coming back down, and here the volumes, that's where they are right now. This is where the volumes are, because that price can go down. They have the best margins here, and that is of course what you want in a healthy market that is well supplied and sees enough demand. For the cruisers, I think the situation is a little bit different. The Legion is currently trading well below average, landing on the 140 million on average, 147.5 for the sellers, but 134 for the buyers. That is really cheap, a big margin here as well. We're not oversupplied. I don't think anything crazy is happening here, and that's the weird stuff, right? We are not oversupplied. We're seeing less than half a page of new Legions coming in on the market, and yet we are trading below average. This is showing that for the tactical cruiser market, there just isn't that much demand. This could really be the impact of alpha clones, I think, on the market as well, although you'd expect that for the confessors. These are Omega as well, so no, that doesn't make sense. I don't have a good explanation for that. How can these cruisers keep going to below average and even 1 year low points on next to no supply? That just doesn't make too much sense to me. The Loki is doing a counter move to almost all the others, heading for 200 million ISK here, 197 for the sellers and 184 for the buyers. These have both been forced up substantially. At least that is still normal. As a response, in the last 24 hours, we get a full front page, driving the price from 200 down to 197. So at least here there is some movement on this opportunity to sell Lokis for an above average price. But then if we move to the Proteus market, we're going back down, 140 million on average. We're talking 138 now for the sellers and 125 for the buyers. And sure, we have a full front page here of, yeah, again, we have a full front page of new Protei coming in. Everything is less than 10, so it's really not that much supply either. And yet, selling 1, selling 3, selling 6 of them, they are driving the price down from 144 down to 138 here on maybe a dozen ships or so. This is completely counter to my own intuition. You would think that they would just hold off. If you have one Proteus, why are you competing with people that are selling at this lower price range, and you decide to still put that one Proteus up? It just does not make sense to me. Finally, here we get the Tengu chart that actually managed to climb back to 180 as well. It seems to be a bit more popular, but crashing down very quickly. 165 now for the sellers, 155 for the buyers. If we try and get that on the chart, we're back basically on an average range, and here last 24 hours next to nothing. How is that possible? The Tengu goes up in price, goes back to an above average price, and you would think we'd see a lot of supply coming in then, but no, the prices crashed down just yesterday, 170, and then now today we're driving us down to 164 on 1, 2, 3, 4 sell orders below 10 in number. It's crazy. I don't have a good explanation as to why this is happening in the Tech 3 cruiser market. One thing is for sure, if for instance the Legion continues on this trend and you can grab one for 135 million or less, you're making a pretty good deal on that comeback. Your potential upswing is towards 190 million ISK. I would be very careful in that, maybe do it like one ship at a time or something like that, but it's definitely worth trying if this keeps happening, and it just keeps happening. The Legion is going down to 140 million on next to no supply, next to no availability. The competition here is so crazy. We've got finally 44 of them at 164 million, and then just a couple dozen ships gets 20 million, almost 18 million or something like that from that price range, all the way down to well, a pretty damn low range. And those buyers at 133, they're right there buying really cheap Legions if they can grab them, of course. So that's the difference in that Tech 3 market between the Legions and the cruisers. I think for me personally is completely day and night. It does mean that right now you're not gonna be gambling on any of these ships because they're in their normal range. Don't expect too big swings between those, unless something happens in nullsec. If you want to take a gamble, it is going to be something like the Legion. That chart looks pretty interesting, and those buyers look pretty interesting as well. Perhaps the Proteus, that's possible too, right? Definitely below average. 126 for the buyers. If you try to get that to show up on the chart, that's somewhere down here as well. Yeah, it's up to you to decide. And if you have an explanation for what's happening in the cruiser market, I would love to hear it. That just leaves us with the extra product for the week. Actually, I have it open already, coming in at 58.45. There we go. It's going to be the Navy battlecruisers, or faction battlecruisers. They don't have pirate faction battlecruisers. Would love to see those, to be honest. Definitely something that CSP could do at some point. But the main reason for this is that I did see a post on Reddit proclaiming victory for the Galente in faction warfare, where they took their final system that they normally hold or something like that. It's basically, I think it's not a complete domination, but like a midway point on a comeback. And so that should move these markets. Let's take a look at the Brudix Navy issue, Galente Tide. What we're clearly seeing here is that we are at a low point, indicating that the Galente are winning out. Their LP should be very cheap and plentiful. Look at the stark difference here from June. 230 million ISK, right now 130 million on average, 125 in fact for the sellers and 114 for the buyers. If you're looking to invest in those faction warfare waves, right now I would say Brudix Navy issue looks like a pretty good place to try and buy. And then we get the opposite, of course. The other faction is the Caldari. Here is the Drake Navy issue, and indeed they are taking some losses. The price of a Drake Navy issue went up, so the price and the value of their LP went up, which should indicate that they have less of it available. And that is a pretty substantial jump from a low point of 130 to 178 million now for the sellers. Buyers forced up to 160 as well. That is clearly a trend break. And what's very noticeable here, of course, these tend to be the faction warfare waves. It doesn't show up in all ships, especially like the cruisers, where CSP decided to completely nerf the Vixor Navy issue, or change the Vixor Navy issue, I should say. That makes a big difference. But look at here, the Caldari, very cheap, very plentiful. Brutix, very expensive, and a lack of LP available. And so here we have a bit of a sign of a turnaround between Galente and Caldari faction warfare. That does tend to echo a little bit on the other side as well, although they should be independent. Here is the Harbinger Navy issue. Went to a low point of around 100 million ISK. Is currently selling for 158, buyers at 126. Still a pretty wide margin, definitely some hesitation. And then we get the Hurricane Fleet issue that has a very strong price range here, 160 million in October, November on the high side, and is currently trading for 130 for the sellers, 118 for the buyers. So yeah, that Brudix Navy issue though, that one looks by far the most interesting, and we can clearly again see that faction warfare influence on this market, which makes it very interesting, somewhat predictable, or at least there is a correlation between what happens in game and then your potential profits on these markets as well. Right now you can sell the Drake Navy issue and buy the Brutix Navy issue, in my opinion. Just to add to this, I am also going to take a quick look at those cruisers, because what I do happen to have is some of the I got a Caracal Navy issue which I tried for exploration. I bought it down here somewhere. Right now also you can clearly see from 37.5 million now selling for 63 million ISK. That should net me some profit. And I also have, nope, that's not what I'm looking for, an Osprey Navy issue that I tested out in exploration as well. Look at that, went below 40 million ISK and is now selling for 53 million ISK. I should be seeing some accidental profits on those as well, but there's the wave. If the Galente can continue that, then of course we potentially are looking at far more expensive Caldari ships and far less expensive Galente ships, and that could be an opportunity in the making as well. Anyways, that's it for this EVE Talk. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.